All right, well, to this alert, right now, former President Bill Clinton is in the hot seat. And moments ago, the former president released his opening statement. We have those remarks. We will bring you those in just a moment. His opening statement hot off the press as he's being grilled by the House Oversight Committee about his relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was deposed yesterday. Republicans say there were at least a dozen times when she deferred their questions to her husband. He has a lot to answer. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany here with my co-host, Emily Compagno. Also joining us, Marie Harf, Fox News contributor and former State Department spokesperson under President Obama. Donna Rotuno, Fox News contributor, criminal defense attorney, co-host of the weekly Rap Sheet, and host of the podcast Crime and Justice with Donna Rotuno, and Paul Morrow, attorney, retired NYPD inspector, Fox News contributor, and also host of the weekly Rap Sheet on Fox Nation. Well, let's start here. A trove of documents was wheeled into the Performing Arts Center in Chappaqua, New York, ahead of the former president's arrival. Clinton released a copy of those remarks, which I noted. He said this, quote, "First, I had no idea of the crimes Epstein was committing. No matter how many photos you show me, I have two things at the end of the day that matter more than your interpretation of those 20-year-old photos. I know what I saw, and more importantly, what I did not see. I know what I did, and more importantly, what I did not do. I saw nothing," he said, "and I did nothing wrong." Oversight Committee members expect today's deposition to take longer than the 6 hours his wife Hillary spent in the hot seat yesterday. And afterwards, Hillary Clinton accused the committee of wasting time.
I'm not going to do it again. They had a chance to do it in public, and I wish they had done it in public. If they are going to fulfill their responsibilities to literally investigate the investigations, which is what they originally said was the scope of their work, I think they could have spent the day more productively.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer has said neither Bill nor Hillary are being accused of wrongdoing, but there were inconsistencies in Hillary's story.
We look forward to asking lots of questions that I think any curious media outlet in America would have. Ms. Clinton deferred a lot of questions to her husband today. There were at least a dozen times when she said, "You'll have to ask my husband that. I can't answer that." So we already had a big portfolio of questions for him, and that increased yesterday.
Donna, you and I were talking about this opening statement. He kind of pre-butts his opening statement, former President Clinton, with this. "As someone who grew up in a home with domestic abuse, not only would I not have flown on his plane if I had any inkling of what he was doing, I would have turned him in myself and led the call for justice for his crimes, not sweetheart deals."
Well, I think that's interesting for the former president to say. We as American people watch Bill Clinton lie to us time and time again about his own wrongdoing. So I think we have to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. Jeffrey Epstein is somebody who he was involved with for a long time. There are photos to prove it. There are emails to prove it. Now, whether that means that he was involved in wrongdoing is different than whether he knew about it. And, he talks about this 2008 plea deal, as Hillary spoke about yesterday, and talked about how it was this sweetheart deal and that wasn't right. But if you know anything about the way criminal cases go through a system and why cases plead, a lot of times it has to do with non-cooperation by the victims that are involved. And I know a lot about that 2008 case. One of the prosecutors on that case happens to be a friend of mine. And I know firsthand that they had issues with people wanting to move forward. So that deal wasn't because Jeffrey Epstein got some great deal because of who he was. It was because of problems with their case. So to kind of blame that as the reason that he got away with this for so long, I think is probably not accurate. Beyond that, Hillary has spent 4 decades in the public eye talking about how she stands by Bill. She has never one time condemned him for the actions that he has been involved with women. She always condemned the women. And so here we are now with this sort of holier than thou take on it that I think Bill is going to take as well. And with Jeffrey Epstein no longer on this planet, we're never going to have answers from the other side.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of frustration among those young women, those survivors, that they won't get those answers. Emily, he says, Bill Clinton, the second reason I'm here is that the girls and women whose lives Jeffrey Epstein destroyed deserve not only justice but healing. He said that. He also stands up for Hillary Clinton. He said, but before we start, I have to get personal. You made Hillary come in. She had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, nothing. She has no memory of even meeting him. She neither traveled with him nor visited him or his properties. Whether you subpoena 10 people or 10,000, including her, it was simply not right, he says.
That's fine. I mean, I think we've known for decades that they are, at least in public, quite a team, and neither will ever say anything untoward or contradictory about the other. To me, it means nothing, and you hit the nail on the head when you talked about his pierced credibility up until this point. And I think the notion of embarrassment, the notion of power dilution is quite a tempting sort of blackmail source, and I think reason behind so many people that keep their mouth shut. We have likened this situation to Weinstein, to Kevin Spacey, to these sort of poorly kept secrets that are well known within circles. And the reality is you can't prove, short of something in writing, that someone knew something. And that's why these people are allowed to fester as malignant tumors in our society, because you couple people that don't want to shake something like a marriage or a public perception or their power, you couple that with victims being voiceless and terrified and having zero type of representation, even being forced to sign NDAs. I mean, the level of complexity here that stifled these hundreds and hundreds of victims and that emboldened these hundreds and hundreds of either bystanders or predators, it's a complex and unfortunate machine. So I don't think that there's going to be a provable element here unless, yes, something is in writing. But I will say this, chipping away at it will work. It's just like a drop of water on a stone. It will work as long as there keeps being this pressure, because eventually there will be something that is provable, and then the entire sham can finally come to light.
Paul, I heard an attorney say yesterday that he would start with the pictures of Bill Clinton and Epstein and drill down on those and ask the context, the time, the place, the memory. Probably a good place to start.
Well, first thing I would ask in that context would be, did you pose for that painting wearing a dress that they found on the wall on the Upper East Side? What's the story with that?
Yeah.
All right, a couple of things real quick. First of all, if this is such a nothing burger, then why did the Clintons fight it so hard? All right, come out, say your piece, and go away. Obviously, they were going to be embarrassed, etc. Number two, I would also ask, in terms of how they set up Bill's testimony here with Hillary, who was the +1 relative to Ghislaine. Now, the Clintons are good lawyers. Even though Bill lost his license, they will have lawyered this from now until doomsday. So they're going to have their answers. I wouldn't expect any big revelations, but put them on the spot and say, do you remember who the +1 was, since Hillary said it and then dove for, a foxhole because she didn't want to answer that question? Now, we're asking the wrong stuff, all right? The Clintons are old news, and I think the country wants to know more about Epstein's machinations than they do about Bill Clinton. I think the public has long ago made up their mind about Bill Clinton. What I would be asking is the following. The Clinton Global Initiative, all right, we all know, anybody who has seen or read the book Clinton Cash, the Peter Schweizer things, knows what that thing is about. I was an early warning relative to this NGO system that the progressives have put together that's a shadow government that has Americans saying, wait a minute, where's all this money coming from? Oh, it's our tax money. How did that work out? They should be looking at any of the commonalities between Epstein and that, because I think they're likely there. I don't know anything, but I think that they are. That's where I would be going. And then lastly, real quick, the search warrant returns. I've been saying this since I'm on here. If you do a search warrant, what you find, you got to bring back to the judge. This is what I got out of the house. Okay. At least 3 search warrants, likely 4. The house out in the desert, the one on the Upper East Side, and the house on the island. What did you find? Because there's going to be an entry in there that says 400 videotapes. And now you know how he had the leverage he had. That's where to start. Forget the painting, forget the photos. Where did he get the leverage to have Bill Gates eaten out of his hands?
Yeah, no, the leverage is a big part of this. You know, Maria, it's interesting. Politico Playbook was writing yesterday about how this new generation of Democrats is basically saying, you can see it here, but we're not going to have fealty to our forebears. There's always been this deference to the Clintons, but that time has passed. They were a part of calling them in and said this is a bipartisan, both-party situation that we both want to see happen.
That's right. I mean, some of them voted for this in the House, which is extraordinary. We can see how times are changing. And look, I agree with Emily. I think we just need to keep chipping away with this. I actually would have liked to see these on camera. on video. I think transparency here is the best thing we can do. The Clintons wanted them on camera. Why don't we want to see that? Why are we just relying on members of Congress who do have their own reasons for saying things to come out and tell us what they said? So I would have liked to see them on camera.
That's going to come out, by the way. On the first go, you're saying.
I want everyone who's mentioned multiple times here to be deposed. Larry Summers, Bill Gates, and you're all probably going to yell at me. Donald Trump is mentioned 6,000 times at least in the documents we have seen. So I think if we want to get to the bottom of the Epstein story, we have to depose not just Bill Clinton, not just Hillary, who never met him, and I actually think it was a waste of time that they deposed her, but all these powerful men who were caught up. You know, Les Wexner had to answer questions last week, who were caught up in this. And I think that has to include Donald Trump. He is named in these thousands of times. And there's also, I mean, Epstein's not alive, but Ghislaine Maxwell still is. And she is clearly trying to get a pardon from President Trump. She was moved to this lower security prison. She can still answer questions. And I think, you know, I'm the only non-lawyer on this couch, but I think there has to be a way to compel her to do so. I don't know what it is, but I would like to hear from her.
I would note that Donald Trump was not on the plane, so putting him in the same pool as Bill Clinton, who was on the plane, I think it was
But he's mentioned, Kayleigh, all of times. So ask him the question.
However, and I would also note that there is video. It's going to come out as soon as today. But you are right that the Clintons wanted on the first go this to be on-cam testimony, not
live,
characterized, and then video thereafter. But we will be getting the video.
That's
and
right.
I'm told Hillary is, at least Lauren Boebert said she's not the happiest on camera. So
you know what? I wouldn't be either.
We'll see. All right.
I don't blame her.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.